Hey guys, tonight we slip behind the stone walls of a place where silence is sacred, obedience is absolute, and comfort is, well, non-existent. Think long hours, colder beds, and rules enforced by guilt and candlelight. Ever wonder what medieval discipline really felt like? If that sounds like your cup of weak broth, go ahead and like and subscribe. Only if you enjoy this kind of thing. Drop a comment with your city and the time. Lights low, fan on. Let's enter the cloister together. Let's begin with the part no one ever talks about. The fact that medieval nuns didn't actually wake up. They were summoned. At an hour when even the rats were still snoozing, the clanging of the cloister bell sliced through the cold like a judgmental ghost. You don't open your eyes because you're rested. You open them because disobedience gets noted and punished. Possibly with fasting. Possibly with floor scrubbing. Possibly with divine disappointment, which, as everyone knows, is the worst kind. You, a fresh-faced novice nun in the year 1328, are lying on a straw-filled mattress that squeaks like it's auditioning for a haunted house. The blanket is a wool shroud so itchy it might be legally classified as a weapon. Your feet are cold, always cold. The floor is stone, always stone. And the chamber pot is, let's just say, a high-stakes game of aim and humility. Now, imagine peeling yourself from that bed at 3:45 a.m. for Matins, the first of 7 daily prayers. That's right, 7. 7 services. Because apparently God is very busy, and you need to check in like a spiritual intern with performance anxiety. You shuffle through the cloister, your breath puffing in the air like a guilty secret. There's no candle. Wax is expensive. So you navigate by instinct and prayer. You're barefoot because your one pair of shoes is reserved for outdoor duties, and also because ascetic suffering builds character, or at least foot calluses. The chapel is dark, stone, and cold, 3 of medieval architecture's favorite hobbies. Other sisters file in, silent and expressionless, like very devout ghosts. You take your place in the choir stalls, which sound fancy, but are really just wooden benches designed to ensure your spine will be shaped like a question mark by age 30. The abbess stands nearby, already judging you. The service begins. Latin chants fill the room. You do not understand most of them. Why? Because education in Latin depends on whether you joined a rich convent, lucky you, or a poor one. Guess again. Your job is to keep up phonetically and pretend like you're not quietly inventing syllables halfway through the Te Deum. Historical curiosity pill. Many nuns were illiterate. They memorized prayers by repetition, not by reading. It was less theology, more musical chairs, but with more kneeling. Eventually, the hour-long prayer ends, and the sisters return to their cells, but not to sleep. Oh no, sleep is for weaklings and secular folk. You get maybe a quick lie-down before lauds, which kicks off just before sunrise, followed by a cheerful morning of chores, contemplation, and very medieval drudgery. You are now expected to perform what the rule of Saint Benedict lovingly calls manual labor. This could mean spinning wool, tending to the convent's garden, spoiler, it's all leaks, copying manuscripts if you're lucky, or cleaning out the pigsty if you're not. And no, you don't get to pick. The abbess assigns duties based on a mystical combination of hierarchy, favoritism, and whether or not you whispered during prayer last week. Today, you're on latrine duty. The nunnery's toilet, such as it is a glorified wooden plank suspended over a hole. You're armed with a bucket of water, which is mostly ice, and a rag on a stick. You spend the next hour trying not to gag while contemplating whether your soul is being cleansed metaphorically or just very literally humiliated. A nun walks by and gently reminds you, laborare est orare. To work is to pray. You resist the urge to ask if God really needs his heavenly plumbing scrubbed with this much enthusiasm. Breakfast is finally announced with another bell. You rush in, quietly of course, because everything in a convent is either whispered or scolded. The refectory smells like cold porridge and silent judgment. You sit in silence while one of the older nuns reads scripture aloud, again in Latin. Meanwhile, your meal consists of mush, brown bread that could double as masonry, and weak ale. Because water, as we've covered, is for the brave and/or the dead. The food is bland by design. The idea is to avoid indulgence. Flavor is a sin. Satisfaction is vanity. And yes, chewing too loudly is a moral failing. And just when you're finally seated, comfortably choking down turnip gruel, the bell rings again. This time, it's for terse. More prayer. You swallow your last spoonful like a condemned woman downs her final bite. Then it's back to the chapel for another round of standing, kneeling, and chanting. You might be wondering, did nuns ever get free time? Technically, yes. It was called meditative contemplation, and usually involved silently walking in a circle for 30 minutes, thinking about how unworthy you are. If you're lucky, you're assigned to the scriptorium to copy religious texts by hand. Sounds relaxing? You're seated on a hard stool, bent over a piece of rough parchment by candlelight, using ink made from oak galls and iron salts. If your quill breaks, you sharpen it yourself. If you smudge the ink, you start over. And no, you can't complain. Your vow of silence says hello. Historical curiosity pill. Monastic ink was prone to mold in damp weather. Some manuscripts have thumb-sized black patches where mildew took over. If you sneezed on your page, it was basically ruined. Eventually, you get a moment to breathe, but only metaphorically. The air smells like damp wool, incense, and whatever was fermenting in Sister Agnes's sandals. You head to sext, midday prayer, followed by more labor. Laundry, maybe. And by laundry, we mean dragging tunics to a frozen stream and pounding them with a rock until you feel like you've committed a crime. And the best part? It's still not even dinner yet. But something's brewing. Something odd. A strange silence in the chapel. A few whispers behind the cloister wall. Sister Joan didn't show up to lauds this morning, and the infirmarian looked worried. The abbess hasn't said a word, but you've got a feeling, a gnawing one, like the lice in your wimple, that something is very wrong, and that tonight's prayers won't be for peace. They'll be for the departed. Here's a comforting thought to start your evening. Someone in the convent just died. You don't know who yet, not officially. But if you've spent even 24 hours in a medieval nunnery, you know that nothing spreads faster than holy gossip, not even lice. Except, perhaps, lice carrying gossip. It begins with a subtle shift. The midday bell sounds more hollow than usual, as if the rope knew something it wasn't telling. The refectory meal is cut short. There's a strange pause before none, the afternoon prayer, and Sister Benedicta, the eldest among the sisters, is seen holding a beeswax candle during the day. That only means one thing: the soul light. It's lit when someone's about to meet their maker, or has already gotten there ahead of schedule. And sure enough, by the time the sun dips behind the cloister wall, the news breaks like stale barley bread. Sister Joan is dead. Now, before you imagine a peaceful passing, candle in hand, gentle sigh, choir of angels, etc. Let's adjust expectations to the medieval setting. Sister Joan, as it turns out, had been coughing for weeks. You didn't notice because everyone coughs here. It's practically the convent's official greeting. She probably caught the fever, which could mean literally anything. In medieval terms, fever covered everything from the common cold to plague-adjacent horror. No one diagnosed anything with certainty unless it involved boils, bloodletting, or dying in full view of a relic. You and the others are gathered in the chapel for a vigil. The body has been washed, with vinegar, because soap is rare, and sanctity apparently demands salad dressing, wrapped in a plain wool shroud and laid before the altar. There's no coffin. Those are for rich people and saints. Just a wooden board beneath her, and the whispered murmurs of Compline, the night prayer. You kneel on the cold floor. Again. Your knees no longer protest. They gave up sometime around last Easter. Candlelight flickers along the stone walls, casting shadows that dance in unholy directions. The abbess intones a psalm. You try not to think about death. You fail. Historical curiosity pill. The average age of death for a medieval nun was higher than for secular women, mostly because they weren't dying in childbirth, but they still fell to epidemics, infections, and poorly ventilated living quarters where the air quality could be politely described as fungal. After prayers, no one speaks. Not out of reverence, though that's the official story, but because silence is a requirement. The rule of Saint Benedict doesn't allow idle chatter. It does, however, allow long glances, raised eyebrows, and emotionally loaded shuffles. You head back to your cell. It's not a private room. Cell is a generous term for your narrow cot tucked behind a wooden partition that offers as much soundproofing as a slice of bread. You lie down, fully clothed, because changing into something comfortable was invented centuries after comfort itself. The candle by your door sputters out. That's when you hear it. A quiet weeping from across the hall. You freeze. It's not the usual post-prayer sniffling. It's sharp, broken. Not the kind of crying someone does when they've lost a friend. This is the sound of someone afraid. You sit up. "Sister?" you whisper. No answer. You're not supposed to speak after Compline, but you do anyway. "Sister?" Silence. And then, footsteps. Bare, fast, fleeing. You throw off the blanket. Not because you want to investigate. Oh no, you're no medieval Sherlock Holmes. You're just cold, wide awake, and there's now a mystery on your hands. And like all nuns, you've learned that curiosity, while frowned upon, is basically unavoidable. You creep down the hall. And that's when you see it. The infirmary door is slightly open, which it shouldn't be. Ever. You push it with one finger. It creaks, a theatrical kind of creak that probably wasn't there yesterday, but has shown up now for dramatic purposes. Inside, it's dark. Only the faintest smell of herbs, vinegar, and something worse. A cot lies empty. Joan's, but beside it, hastily stuffed under a cloth, a book. Books are rare in the convent, sacred, counted, signed out only by permission of the abbess or the scribe nun. And this one has no markings. It's not a psalter, not a book of hours. This one is thinner. The leather binding cracked. The pages, handwritten, look uneven, scribbled in haste. You shouldn't open it. You open it. Inside, drawings, notes, herbs, wounds, a sketch of a body with black boils, and at the top, remedies and observations of Sister Joan. Your stomach sinks like a stone into a holy well. Because Sister Joan wasn't just a nun with a bad cough, She was studying, secretly, which means someone knew. Someone was helping her, or watching. And someone didn't want this book found. You close it and tuck it under your tunic, which is not only against convent rules, it's probably heresy adjacent. But you don't care, because something stinks here. And for once, it's not just the soup. Back in your cell, you hide the book under your mattress. A dangerous game, since mattresses are just bundles of straw and suspicious fabric, and anyone can poke through them with a stick. As you lie down again, the silence returns. Deep, pressing. Then the bell tolls once more. A single, long note that echoes through the stone like a final breath. Someone else is missing. Congratulations. You're now officially part-time nun, part-time accidental detective. It's sometime after midnight, and someone else has vanished. The bells don't lie. You hear the toll, once, low and long, the convent's version of, "We lost another one." No announcement follows, just the usual. A vague directive to pray for the departed, and the silent rustle of habits as the sisters shuffle nervously in the dark. You don't sleep, partially because your mind is racing, and partially because your mattress is stuffed with straw and secrets. That book, Sister Jones, is still under there, and your back has been reminding you all night. You lie awake, wondering, who knew she was keeping notes? Who would want them hidden? And more pressingly, what happens to nuns who dig into things they shouldn't? Spoiler, it's not a reward ceremony. Now let's be clear, this is the Middle Ages. You don't have a magnifying glass, a lab coat, or even basic literacy beyond a few Latin phrases, and a solid understanding of don't get caught. Hoketh! But you've got instincts. And instincts are all you need when you start noticing the other odd things around the convent. Take, for instance, the vegetable garden. You're assigned there the next morning. Normally, this is penance for something. Yawning during lauds, falling asleep during vigils, or sighing too loudly near Mother Prioress. But this time, the abbess assigns you herself, with a look that says, maybe you need fresh air, or maybe I'm watching you. Hard to say. So, off you go. The garden is a patch of stubborn dirt fenced in with splintered wood and monastic optimism. It grows the usual: leeks, onions, a carrot or two pretending to thrive, and cabbages that look like they've given up on life. And tucked in the back, a small patch of unfamiliar herbs, half hidden behind a stack of rotting turnips. Curious, you approach. Lavender, sage, comfrey, and is that belladonna? Ah, yes, belladonna, also known as deadly nightshade, used in very small amounts to treat pain, used in slightly larger amounts to greet St. Peter. Definitely not the sort of thing that should be in a convent vegetable bed, and certainly not beside Sister Jones' recipe for poultices against the fever. You lean in. The leaves have been clipped recently. Someone's using it. A voice behind you clears its throat. You nearly jump out of your habit. It's Sister Petronilla, 72 years old, speaks twice a day, once to pray, once to complain about the temperature. She's not supposed to be out here. You smile awkwardly. She stares, then says, "Joan shouldn't have written anything down. Writing invites judgment." And then she walks away. You are now fully awake. Historical curiosity pill. Nuns who practiced herbal medicine often walked a fine line between healer and heretic. The Church praised saintly miracles, but viewed personal experimentation with suspicion. Too much botanical curiosity? Suddenly, you're a witch. With a bonfire appointment, you return to the cloister with vegetables, questions, and a general sense that everyone knows more than they're saying. At midday, prayers feel tense. Someone is missing from the choir stalls again. Sister Agnes, the young one who cried after Joan's death. The abbess doesn't mention it. Nobody mentions it. You eat lunch in total silence. The pottage tastes slightly more suspicious than usual. Possibly because you now know what's growing next to the cabbage. Possibly because you're pretty sure the cook hasn't blinked in 3 days. After sext, you sneak back to your cell. It's a risk, yes. But what is monastic life without a bit of quiet, rule-breaking existential dread? You take out the book. There, tucked between a drawing of a fever chart and a sketch of some very unhappy lungs, is a note. Not in Sister Joan's hand. A different script. More elegant. Less rushed. The abbess forbids mention of the illness. She says God will reveal what he wishes. But more are falling sick. The garden is my only weapon. May God forgive my defiance. No signature. You exhale slowly. So Joan wasn't just scribbling herbal nonsense. She was fighting something. Quietly. Maybe too quietly. And someone didn't approve. A knock interrupts your reading. Not a loud knock. A single tap. Barely there. You freeze. Then, a whisper. Sister, be in the sacristy after Compline. Alone. And then, silence. You throw the book back under your straw mattress. You try to breathe normally. You fail. Later, as the day dissolves into Compline, the final prayer of the evening, you kneel once more. Your legs ache. Your brain burns. The candlelight flickers in familiar rhythms, but everything feels different. Like the walls are listening. You finish the hymn. You cross yourself. You bow. And then you don't go to bed. You wait until the corridor clears. You wait until the whispers fade. And then you slip out, bare feet cold against the flagstones, heart beating like the chapel bell before a funeral. The sacristy is small, quiet. A room of holy vessels, old relics, and the lingering scent of centuries-old incense and poorly ventilated divinity. And in the corner, a shape, a figure in shadow. You squint. It's not a nun. It's a novice, maybe 14 years old, big eyes, clutching something in her arms. It's a bundle of cloth. Inside, another book. Not Sister Joan's. This one is older, bound with leather, pages stiff with age and fingerprints. The girl looks up at you. They're hiding more, she whispers. Joan found this last year, hidden in the library behind the statue of Saint Apollonia. They said it was lost. You reach for the book. But behind you, a second knock. Not gentle, not curious, hard, sharp. The door begins to open. The door creaks open. Your hands freeze mid-reach, still hovering over the book held by the trembling novice. Her eyes widen, not in fear of being caught. Oh no. In the specific gut-punching panic that only comes from knowing exactly who's about to walk in. And then she whispers one word, so soft, it barely exists. Abbess. You stand, slowly, because sudden movements in a convent after curfew are only encouraged if you're actively bursting into flames. The abbess enters like a shadow with purpose. No candle, no sound, just the click of her wooden sandals on the stone and the kind of silence that makes the room feel 10 degrees colder. She doesn't look surprised to find you there. She does, however, look deeply unsurprised, which is worse. Well, she says in a voice as dry as lentil pottage, curiosity is indeed the devil's lantern. You open your mouth to reply, to explain, to something. But the abbess isn't interested in your excuses. She raises a hand, and the novice lowers her gaze. and promptly evaporates from the room with the efficiency of someone who has practiced disappearing under pressure. You're alone now. You, the abbess, and the book. She takes one step forward and closes the sacristy door with a soft click. It might as well be a dungeon gate. And then, in a voice gentler than expected, "Do you know why Sister Joan died?" A pause. "You've never been asked a question like this. Not in this tone. Not by the woman who usually speaks only in decrees and psalms. So you tell the truth." "I think she was trying to save us." The abbess nods. Just once. Then walks past you, gently lifts the book from the table, and turns a page with a reverence usually reserved for relics, or the last scrap of cheese on feast days. She was clever. Too clever. She believed knowledge could serve faith. Another page turns. But knowledge without obedience is dangerous. You don't know what to say, so you do what any reasonably terrified nun would do. You ask a question instead. Was it you? Who took her work? Who hid it? The abbess's eyes snap to yours. "No," she says flatly. "That was the bishop." Well, that's worse. Historical curiosity pill. In the 14th century, bishops had wide-reaching power over convents. They could audit monastic behavior, confiscate texts, and even imprison disobedient nuns. Many believed unapproved reading or writing was a threat, especially in women's hands. The abbess places the book back on the table and exhales like she's aged 3 decades in a sentence. "I let Joan work in secret. She healed Sister Magdalena's leg, you know, when the physician bled her near to death, and she soothed the fever in the winter of 24 with nothing but herbs and common sense. You remember that winter? 4 nuns died anyway, but 6 survived who shouldn't have. Joan had called it a miracle. Quietly. Because if you call something a miracle too loudly, it's no longer God's. It's hers." The abbess moves toward the candle and lights it with a long match. The light flickers off her face, revealing something you've never seen before. Weariness. "She wrote too much," she says. "Left too many traces. And someone wrote to the bishop. I don't know who. Maybe a sister, maybe a priest, maybe just a rat in a robe." Then her gaze sharpens. "And now you've read it, which makes you inconvenient. You've never been a political problem before, just a background nun, mostly invisible, and occasionally useful for weeding the leek beds and not fainting during procession. Now, you're a liability with hay in her hair and a hidden book under her mattress. What will you do with me? You ask quietly. The abbess doesn't answer. Instead, she hands you something, a key, small, iron, old. To the scriptorium, she says. Go tonight. Read everything, especially the locked drawer beneath the lectern. Then decide. Decide what? You want to ask. But she's already leaving. And before she slips back into the hallway darkness, she murmurs, Truth is sacred, but secrets keep the roof from caving in. Then she's gone. Now, remember, in a convent, nighttime movement is more scandalous than wearing colored stockings. But you have a key and a mission. And frankly, what's one more sin at this point? You wait until the candle burns halfway down, then slip into the corridor. Bare feet, heart pounding, every sound magnified, creaking beams, a snore from the dormitory, a rat auditioning for Hamlet in the ceiling. The scriptorium is locked, until it isn't. You turn the key. The bolt slides back. Inside, the room smells of parchment and mildew and holy pressure. Rows of manuscripts line the walls, guarded by layers of dust and a healthy dose of divine intimidation. You find the lectern. Beneath it, the drawer. You open it. Inside, scrolls, letters, diagrams, and one sealed parchment with a broken wax crest, the bishop's seal. You unfold it and read. It's worse than you thought. A list of names. Nuns marked for removal. Sister Joan, Sister Agnes, and one more name. Yours. You drop the parchment. Behind you, the door creaks. The creak of the door stretches like the final breath of a hymn. You freeze. You are in the scriptorium. At night. Holding a bishop's letter that says you were supposed to be dead by now, or at the very least, quietly disappeared like Sister Agnes, who vanished with all the subtlety of a misplaced hymn book. You turn, but it's not the bishop. It's Sister Theodrada. Of course it is. Theodrada, tall, thin, and shaped like a judgmental candle. The convent's librarian, rule keeper, and spiritual equivalent of a paper cut. She's the one who once scolded a novice for sneezing during Vespers. Reading after Compline, she says, and unauthorized access. She steps closer, fingers tented before her like a spider praying for rain. You've read the letter? You nod. You understand, then? You do. More than you want to. This wasn't just a secret garden experiment gone wrong. This was a quiet inquisition, a bishop's order to root out heretical medicine and ensure that the nuns remained obedient vessels of prayer, not agents of knowledge. Sister Joan? Too curious. Sister Agnes? Too close. You? Too observant. And Theodrada? Too involved. You sent the letter, you whisper. You reported her. Her lips tighten, but she doesn't deny it. She was endangering the soul of the convent, she says. Disobedience spreads. You let one nun believe she's smarter than Scripture. And suddenly they're distilling moonlight in the cloister and calling it a cure. Joan was saving lives. She was challenging hierarchy. That's more dangerous than any illness. You take a breath, steady, like during the long, silent pauses before matins. Your hands are cold, your feet colder. And now me? You ask. There's a pause. Then, no, not you. That's when you notice what she's holding. A candle and a flask of oil. You move too late. With a practiced flick, Theodrada pours the oil across the old manuscripts stacked along the shelf. Centuries of copied gospels, treatises, letters, and herbs, doused. No more secrets, she murmurs. She lights the candle. The flame catches like it's been waiting for centuries. Vellum curls, ink runs like blood. Smoke unfurls into the high ceiling with a hiss and a moan, as if the books themselves are sighing in disappointment. You grab Joan's notes, the only copy left, and run. Down the cloister hallway, smoke trailing behind you. Bells begin to ring, but not for prayer this time. For fire, for panic, for something no one ever rehearsed. Sisters pour out of cells, habits fluttering, confusion and terror etched in every face. The abbess appears, barefoot, furious, and wielding a bucket, like the archangel of sanitation. "What did you do?" she asks, staring at the rising plume from the scriptorium roof. "It wasn't me," you gasp. "It was Theodrada." The abbess's face hardens. Then she nods. Later, when the fire is out and half the library is smoke and sorrow, the bishop's seal curls in the ashes. Theodrada is gone, vanished. Whether she burned or fled, no one knows. But Sister Joan's notes, her book, her work, her questions, they survive. Because you still have them. And more importantly, because the abbess doesn't take them from you. Instead, she hands you something else. a quill, fresh parchment, a quiet smile. "You write now," she says, "but do so carefully." Historical curiosity pill. Some convents in the Middle Ages were centers of learning, but under constant scrutiny. Women who wrote too boldly risked censure, especially if they strayed from approved theology. Yet, quietly, persistently, some nuns recorded medical knowledge, herbal lore, and even political commentary, preserving what they could, hidden in plain sight. In the weeks that follow, life at the convent settles. Sort of. The bell still rings at 3:45. The porridge is still emotionally devastating. But something has changed. The abbess watches you differently. The novices whisper about herbs again. The candle in the infirmary stays lit longer at night. And you? You write. Carefully. Quietly. Hidden between the lines of psalters and psalms. Because truth, like ink, seeps through the cracks eventually. And somewhere, between the silence and the bells, Sister Joan is probably smiling. You still wouldn't last a day as a medieval nun. But maybe, just maybe, you'd last long enough to matter. And in the end, that was more than most got. Good night, dear listener. And don't forget, if your mattress starts rustling at midnight, it might just be history whispering back. The second history is why the village baker feared the nunnery's demands. Imagine this. You've just pulled your last loaf from the stone oven when a pale novice in a threadbare habit barrels into your bakehouse like a sheep with a grudge. She's gasping something about a feast day, divine expectations, and a nun named Sister Cuthberga who doesn't like crust. Congratulations. You're the village baker in the year 1357, and the local nunnery has just remembered, with all the subtlety of a cow giving birth, that they've ordered 112 soft white loaves by sunrise. Welcome to ecclesiastical panic baking. Martin, the baker in question, is 43, which means he's basically a walking relic. His knees pop every time he crouches. His back is a question mark. And his apron smells permanently of yeast and mild despair. He's been the village's only baker since old Bertram fell into a flour sack and retired, which in medieval terms meant he died heroically of lung mildew. Martin's shop is a low-ceilinged oven with a roof so warped it looks like it's actively trying to return to nature. His workspace is warm, smoky, and perpetually dusted in flour. The air tastes like bread and mild panic, a scent he's come to associate with clergy orders. Now, before you judge him too harshly for groaning at the nun's request, understand this. Baking for nuns is not like baking for normal customers. Nuns want their loaves round, white, holy, soft, crustless, symmetrical, blessed-looking, and in some cases, inspiring. And they want them all by dawn. Why? Because it's St. Fridolin's Day, a monk who, according to legend, once fed a starving abbey by baking bread from acorns and divine will. And now, Martin is expected to outdo a saint. He mutters a prayer to Saint Honoratus, the patron of bakers, which mostly consists of, "O Lord, deliver me from ecclesiastical taste buds." Then he shovels coals, curses his luck, and begins mixing the first of too many batches. Historical curiosity pill. To make white bread in the 14th century, flour had to be sifted repeatedly through cloth to remove the bran. It was so labor-intensive that peasants rarely saw it, which is exactly why nuns and nobles demanded it constantly, because naturally, holiness is measured in refined carbohydrates. The first hours of the night pass in a flurry of dough slapping, flour coughing, and trying not to trip over the chicken that insists on nesting by the oven. Martin works by candlelight, eyes watering from smoke, his fingers moving by muscle memory. By midnight, he's hallucinating mildly and arguing with a sack of rye. Around 2 a.m., and he briefly dozes off with his head on the kneading board and dreams that Sister Cuthberga is throwing crusty loaves at his head while chanting psalms. But the loaves are coming along. He's shaping them by hand, each one a modest attempt at divinity. He's even found the special pan that the abbess likes, the one that leaves a little cross indentation on the bottom. Because if your bread isn't visibly holy, is it even fit for Mass? Then comes the problem. The flour runs out. This would be less dramatic if the miller, Godfrey, weren't currently halfway to a distant market with his ox cart full of sacks and a jug of something fermented, which means there is no more sifted wheat flour in the village. Martin stands in the empty storeroom, staring at the last scrapings in the barrel. He considers shouting. He considers crying. Instead, he decides to improvise, like a true survivor of medieval catering disasters. He mixes in a bit of barley flour. Not ideal. It's grayer, coarser, and, in his words, the texture of penance. But it's better than air. He shapes the final loaves with trembling hands, brushes each with a little water to make them shine, nun trick number 4, and says a quick blessing in case that helps them rise. Just before dawn, he wraps the last steaming loaves in linen and sets them by the door. Cue the bell. It's not a gentle bell. It's the kind of bell that clangs like a cow stepping on a pot, a signal that the novices have arrived, faces pinched with sleep deprivation and divine urgency. They eye the loaves like judges at a celestial baking competition. "This one's crusty," says one, prodding a barely golden specimen with the wary air of someone inspecting a leper. Martin smiles the tight, terrifying smile of a man who has not slept since yesterday's sunrise and has baked his body weight in blessed bread. "Would you prefer I peel it for you?" They don't laugh. One novice disappears around back, presumably to alert the abbess that the loaves have arrived, though not all are sufficiently ethereal. Martin, meanwhile, wipes sweat and ash from his brow and braces for the inevitable inspection. And then comes the voice. Sister Cuthberga. She doesn't walk. She floats, or at least gives the impression of floating, possibly due to her feet being very small, or the floorboards very warped. She inspects the loaves with pursed lips and furrowed brow. "This one looks dense," she says, lifting a barley-blended offering like it personally offended her. "And this one has a split." Martin wants to remind her that Christ himself probably broke bread with more character than these loaves, but he's too tired for blasphemy. Instead, he nods politely and says, "The wind was aggressive last night. It may have startled the dough." She blinks. "We shall pray for more obedient flour." Then, to his horror, she selects 4 loaves and sets them aside. These must be remade. And here it is, the moment he's been dreading. Because what most villagers don't know is that the nunnery's requests aren't suggestions. They're obligations. Bound by tithe agreements, ecclesiastical favors, and the occasional promise made by Martin's late mother when she donated a goose to the convent. Which means when Sister Cuthberga says remake, what she really means is start again, for free, and possibly sing while you do it. Martin exhales slowly, eyes twitching. He knows the drill. He'll have to reheat the oven, mix a new batch, waste more precious barley, and somehow make bread good enough to satisfy a woman who once sent a novice to return loaves because they smelled like Lent. He watches the cart roll away with the rest of the loaves, the steam rising into the morning air like a soul escaping its body. Then he turns, cracks his knuckles, and picks up the mixing bowl again. Because this is the life of the village baker. And the nuns aren't even the worst of it. Not yet. It's still morning, technically, though Martin, the baker, feels as though time itself has snapped in half and left him dangling somewhere between yesterday's regrets and tomorrow's migraines. He's kneading the second batch of nun-approved dough with the quiet fury of a man baking for judgmental angels. His arms ache, his face is crusted with flour and soot, and somewhere under his apron is a tunic that may or may not be sentient at this point. And the church bell tolls again. Of course it does. He glances at the door, like it owes him money. Because when that bell rings before mid-morning, it usually means one of two things. Either someone's died, or the nunnery has thought of something else. Spoiler: no one's dead. A boy bursts in. Thomas, the vicar's underfed apprentice, breathless, eyes wide, and reeking of incense and fear. He delivers his message with the sincerity of a doomed messenger in a tragic play. The sisters say, Sister Cuthberga says, she forgot to ask for sweet loaves. Martin doesn't flinch. He doesn't shout. He just stares at the child the way one might stare at a goat who's just chewed through the roof. Then he says, very calmly, sweet loaves for the same feast. Today. Thomas nods. For the nuns' supper, with almonds and dried cherries, and Sister Meliora is allergic to honey, so— Oh, marvelous, Martin interrupts. We're making bespoke loaves now. Now, let's pause to explain something truly absurd about medieval baking. Sweet loaves were not a regular feature in village life. Sugar was rarer than mercy during tax season, and dried fruit, imported, expensive, and usually hoarded by monks or rich widows, was considered borderline sinful if used frivolously. Sweet bread was a delicacy, and almonds? Almonds were basically edible currency. Martin has 3 almonds, not sacks, not handfuls, just 3, stashed in a tiny cloth bag behind the flour bin like some sacred relic. He considers his options. Run, fake plague symptoms, change his name and move to Flanders. But no, his spine's too stiff for fleeing, and he's already been reprimanded once for shorting the nunnery's flour tithe last harvest. So he does what any sensible man would do. He reaches for the dried cherries he was saving for midwinter, sprinkles in a whisper of milk he's borrowed from his own breakfast porridge, and crushes 2 of the almonds to mix into the dough. The 3rd almond he eats, for spite. And while the sweet loaves bake, golden, soft, and filled with more desperation than joy, Martin sits by the hearth and tries to remember how this became his life. Back in his youth, he'd wanted to be a mason, or a fisherman, or a anything man. But when his father died, one of those fell into a cider vat and declined to surface accidents, Martin inherited the oven, the debts, and a reputation for consistent crust. So he stayed. He got married, briefly. She ran off with a peddler who sold goose-fat candles and poetry. Martin didn't blame her. He would have left too, if not for the fact that the oven was the only thing in the village that still listened to him without arguing. He sighs, checks the loaves, and mutters under his breath, "Better be saint-worthy, you smug little pastries." They're good, annoyingly good, which only makes things worse. Because now, they'll expect it. The apprentice returns, collects the sweet loaves with trembling hands, and promises Sister Cuthberga that Martin sends his warmest wishes and respectful regards. Martin had actually said, "Tell her they're still warm, and she'd best eat them before the crust reappears." Close enough. But this, dear listener, is not the climax. It's just the prologue of doom. Because as the day wears on, and Martin finally sits down with his own hunk of rye, crust so hard it could be repurposed as a weapon, a visitor appears. This one is different. She walks in without knocking, nose in the air, veil fluttering slightly, despite there being no wind indoors. She wears the nunnery's deep indigo, not the novice beige, not the kitchen sister brown. And that means only one thing. It's the abbess, not Sister Cuthberga. No, this is Abbess Ambrosina herself, flesh and blood incarnate of divine dissatisfaction. She steps over the threshold like it's a negotiation, eyes flicking across the sacks, the fire, the sleeping cat who guards the flower like a very lazy dragon. Then she speaks. Brother Martin. She calls everyone brother, even though he's never taken a vow of anything except overwork. We've been discussing your future. Martin doesn't like the sound of that at all. In medieval England, when the church discusses your future, it usually involves taxes, death, or goats. You see, she continues, we are expanding. Martin blinks. Expanding? The convent has received a bequest, land, from a noble widow whose late husband blessedly believed in indulgences. She says this like it's good news, as if nothing bad has ever come from a rich widow and divine guilt. With this gift comes new sisters, pilgrims, a guest abbot for Lent. More mouths, you understand? Martin nods very slowly, and then she says it, the words that will haunt his back muscles for weeks. We would like to establish a secondary oven on our grounds. The silence in the room thickens. Even the cat lifts its head. A baking oven? Martin asks, incredulous. A small one, for minor baking. But of course, we'd need someone experienced to oversee its operations, to ensure uniformity and holiness. You can feel the moment his soul unravels like a badly tied apron string. You want me to bake for both ovens? Oh no, she says sweetly. You'll train someone, a novice, perhaps two, under your guidance, for as long as it takes. Now, for anyone unfamiliar with medieval religious apprentices, let's clarify. Novices were young, pious, inexperienced, and often about as skilled at baking as a bag of wet gravel. Teaching them would be like asking a hedgehog to make puff pastry, only with more prayers and fewer usable limbs. Martin smiles. It's the kind of smile people wear when they're trying not to combust. I see. Wonderful, says the abbess, and leaves as if she hasn't just lit a match and tossed it directly into the flour barrel of his life. Martin sits in silence. The cat purrs. The fire crackles. Somewhere outside, a crow caws like it's narrating a funeral. And you, listener, might be wondering, is this really such a big deal? Oh, just wait. Because once the nuns begin baking, they stop buying. And for a village baker, that is nothing short of war. The nunnery's new oven arrives with all the subtlety of a royal procession and roughly the same amount of smugness. A cart lurches into the convent courtyard bearing bricks, mortar, a sweating mason, and Sister Cuthberga holding a scroll that says something absurd like Sacred Bakehouse Project, Phase 1. Meanwhile, Martin watches from across the road like a man witnessing his own eulogy being read aloud by people who borrowed his clothes and didn't ask. Let's be clear. Building a secondary oven in a medieval village is like announcing you've built your own moon. Baking was the trade. There were no supermarkets, no competing brands. If your village had a baker, that baker had purpose, power, and, at least theoretically, a monopoly on all things bread. Until the nuns decided that self-rising loaves were next to godliness. Martin leans against the frame of his oven, arms crossed, and mutters to his cat, "Next they'll want communion wafers shaped like tiny angels." The cat sneezes in agreement. Within a week, the oven is finished. A squat, round-lipped dome with a chimney that sticks out like a snobbish finger. Sister Cuthberga names it the Hearth of Mercy. Martin refers to it simply as the usurper. And then come the trainees, 2 novices, faces freshly scrubbed and utterly terrified. Their names are Beata and Wulfhild, and between the 2 of them, they've burned every pot they've touched in the convent kitchen. This, naturally, qualifies them for immediate bread instruction. Martin, now forced into the role of unpaid spiritual culinary consultant, begins their lessons with all the enthusiasm of a monk asked to bless a pile of spoiled onions. "Flour goes in the bowl," he says, watching Wulfhild pour it directly onto the table. "Not the floor, not your sleeve, the bowl." Beata raises a trembling hand. "Do we pray before kneading?" "Only if you think the dough's going to smite you," he replies. Teaching novices to bake is like trying to teach cows to embroider. The flour ends up on the floor, the dough ends up in someone's shoe, and at one point, Beata tries to measure the salt by counting grains for accuracy. Martin nearly retires on the spot. But the worst part isn't the incompetence, it's the improvement. Because, somehow, over the following weeks, possibly through divine intervention, sheer stubbornness, or the fact that Sister Meliora threatened to make them recite psalms during every kneading session, the girls start to get better. And one morning, it happens. A cart rolls past Martin's shop carrying nunnery bread. Not his. Not even blessed by his sourdough starter, which has been passed down through 5 generations and smells faintly of ale and bad decisions. Just simple, round, soft white loaves, slightly uneven, slightly too pale, but unmistakably, unfortunately, edible. Now you might think this was just for the convent's use. Oh no. Sister Cuthberga has visions. Visions of charitable distribution, of baking loaves for the village poor, of selling the extras during feast days to support the sacred mission. In short, the nuns have entered the bread market, and Martin, the village baker, has competition. Let's pause for a historical curiosity pill. Medieval guilds protected tradesmen like Martin with strict rules, but religious institutions were often exempt. A convent could brew ale, weave cloth, and yes, bake bread, without paying the usual taxes or dues, which meant Martin wasn't just facing friendly neighborhood holy women. He was facing a state-sponsored tax-free baking syndicate with its own choir. The villagers, naturally, are thrilled. "I got a loaf from the sisters," says old Ernald at the tavern, "and it came with a prayer slip. Said I'd be forgiven for the turnip incident." Martin grunts. "Did it taste like a prayer?" Ernald grins. "Tasted like not paying for bread." Indeed, the loaves are being offered on a donation basis, which is medieval for "we'll take money if you're not poor, and if you are poor, we'll guilt you into singing hymns about it." Martin's regulars start thinning. The poor go to the nuns, the pious go to the nuns, and the indecisive go to both, and then loudly compare crusts in public. It's chaos. Bread-related loyalties are declared at the market square like feudal banners. One man claims the convent loaves cured his indigestion. Another swears he found a tiny image of St. Cuthbert in his crust. Martin considers building a second oven of his own. He also considers arson. He settles for sarcasm. He starts branding his loaves with a crude M burned in flour on the bottom. M for miracle, he tells a customer. "Since it's a miracle, I'm still in business." And he tries to adapt, offers deals, makes rye loaves shaped like fish for Fridays, even bakes a few honey cakes, a rare treat, only to hear from the vicar's wife that the sister's version is lighter and comes with a blessing. What? Then, one rainy afternoon, a new blow. The abbess sends a request. Could Martin please bake with the nuns once a week? To foster unity and demonstrate collaboration. Also, Sister Beata needs help getting the fire hot enough without scalding her eyebrows off again. Martin reads the letter, folds it into a square, and throws it into his fire. The cat watches it burn and offers no moral guidance. He is not going to bake with them. He is not going to teach them to poach his last customers. He is, however, going to do something foolish. He is going to fight back. Not with fists, not with fire, with flour. Because if the sisters want a baking war, then Martin is going to make a loaf so holy, so perfect, so irresistibly delicious, that even the Virgin Mary would cross herself twice before taking a bite. But what he doesn't know yet is that someone is watching. Someone in the village who knows the secret of the convent's miraculous success. And it has nothing to do with flour, and everything to do with betrayal. There's an unspoken rule in every medieval village. Never underestimate a nun with a vision board and spare time. Sister Cuthberga has both, plus access to a donkey cart and a cousin who works at the bishop's pantry, which is how, on a damp market morning, Martin finds himself watching a stall open directly across from his bakehouse. It's made of repurposed fencing, white linen, and passive aggression. A wooden sign dangles above it, painted in careful lettering, Loaves of Grace, a humble offering from the Sisters of St. Agnes. Donations. Welcome. Healing not guaranteed. Martin doesn't blink. He just adjusts his apron, sharpens his bread knife unnecessarily, and arranges his own loaves with theatrical precision. His newest creations are crusty, golden, and, frankly, smug. One even has a braided top that would make a noblewoman weep. And yet, the crowd is already drifting toward the convent's stall. "Have you tried the rosemary?" whispers someone. "They put prayers in the dough," says another. "Mine tasted like the Psalms," sighs a third. Martin doesn't point out that rosemary is wildly out of season and likely imported from the abbess's personal garden. Or that prayers in the dough mostly means Sister Beata mutters anxiously while kneading. Instead, he does what any rational baker would do when the divine economy comes knocking. He bakes louder. The next morning, the smell of cinnamon fills the street like a weaponized memory. Martin is trying something bold, a festival loaf. He calls it the Temptation of St. Peter. It's spiced, rich, laced with dried apples, and scored with tiny fish patterns. Subtle, tasteful heresy. He even pays a traveling friar in bread and ale to stand near the window and casually mention that Martin's loaves make you dream of heaven. The friar does so enthusiastically, though after the ale, he begins claiming he visited heaven, and it smelled like rye. The nuns are not pleased. Sister Cuthberga sends over a sample of their new loaf, St. Frumenti's Flourless Miracle, made with ground legumes and, allegedly, divine patience. Martin tastes it. It has the texture of regret and the flavor of despair. He still loses 3 customers the next day. But none of this is the real problem. The real problem is Marjorie. Marjorie is 26, unmarried, and runs the pickled goods stall. She has an uncanny ability to hear everything, see everything, and remember it in painful detail. She's also friends with Sister Meliora, the allergic one, and has been visiting the convent once a week, under the pretext of delivering turnip vinegar. One evening, she stops by Martin's shop. She brings a jar of pickled beetroot and an expression that says, "I know something you don't." Martin is up to his elbows in sourdough. "I've heard things," she says casually, placing the jar down, "about why their loaves are so fluffy." He raises an eyebrow. "Go on." Marjorie leans in. "They're using mill-ground flour." Martin blinks. "Everyone uses mill-ground flour." "Not that mill," she says, lowering her voice. "The Bishop's Mill, the one 3 villages over. Finest stones, ground 3 times. Whiter than sin." Martin drops his dough. "That's not fair." "Oh, it gets better," she says, clearly enjoying herself. "Guess who delivers it for free every week, because the abbess once nursed the bishop's gouty sister?" Martin's jaw tightens. "So while I'm using river stone grit flour and sifting it through goat hair," he growls, "they're using silk flour blessed by ecclesiastical nepotism?" "Essentially, yes." He stares into the fire. Somewhere deep inside, a part of him that once cared about rules and reverence snaps like a stale breadstick. "They've declared war," he says softly. Marjorie picks up a cinnamon bun from the tray and bites into it. "And you're losing." That night, Martin does something bold, possibly heretical, certainly regrettable. He sneaks into the convent, not for sabotage, for research. Under cover of fog and moral ambiguity, he creeps around the back gardens, past the compost heap, saintly and fragrant, and into the baking room. The new oven is still warm. Loaves rest in neat rows like obedient disciples. He pokes one. It's light, springy, mocking. Then he sees it. The sack, tucked under the prep table, labeled in fine ink for the Sisters of St. Agnes, his lordship's finest. He doesn't steal it. He's not that kind of man. But he does take a small scoop and tuck it into his tunic. Call it divine sampling. Back at his bakehouse, Martin sifts the flour through his fingers. It's pale, soft, and finer than anything he's touched in months. He sighs. Then he bakes. 1 loaf? Just 1. With stolen flour, a pinch of salt, and a whole lot of resentment. He eats it still warm, and it's heavenly. Infuriatingly, undeniably heavenly. This is what the nuns have been using. This is what he's up against. But he has something they don't. Experience, grit, knees that creak like a ship in fog but still get him to the oven before dawn. He's going to fight. Not with sabotage yet, but with the best loaf the village has ever seen. He'll mix it at midnight, let it rise while the world sleeps, and bake it at first light. A crusted challenge to every novice with a bowl and a prayer. The final bake-off is coming, and heaven help anyone who thinks Martin's going down without a crusty, glorious fight. Dawn arrives with a side of vengeance. Martin is already awake. He's been up since midnight, working with the silent precision of a monk, possessed by a particularly competitive yeast deity. Every surface in his shop is dusted with flour. Every bowl has been scraped, rinsed, and reused. His apron is so stiff with effort, it might qualify as armor. This is not a baking day. This is a reckoning. He's calling the new loaf the Judgment Loaf, because it is. It's everything he knows. Every technique, every trick, every whisper of craft from his late father, his soot-covered mentors, even that smug journeyman in Exeter who once taught him how to trap steam inside the crust using a wet cloth and spite. The dough is a delicate balance of resilience and chew. It's salted just enough to make the crumbs sing. It's brushed with milk and egg for a shine that catches sunlight like polished oak. And, in a stroke of genius, or madness, he scored it with a pattern shaped like a sword, just in case the symbolism was too subtle. He bakes it slowly, patiently. No roaring fire today, just glowing coals and the long, breathless wait of a baker who knows the difference between cooked and perfect. When it comes out of the oven, it doesn't just smell good, it smells fated. Even the cat looks impressed. Now, the village doesn't usually host public food contests, but this morning, through a mysterious series of whispers, started by Marjorie, who may or may not be orchestrating the entire downfall of ecclesiastical bread supremacy, a crowd gathers. They're here for the market comparison. The sisters, of course, show up with baskets lined in white linen and filled with their usual suspects: round loaves of white holiness, soft rolls that smell faintly of nutmeg and virtue, and a few rosemary scones that probably violated 3 local herb laws. Sister Cuthberga leads them, face serene, eyes narrowed. Martin arrives late, dramatically, loaf in hand, no smile on his face. He sets it down with reverence. The crowd leans in. Someone coughs. Then the tasting begins. Old Ernald gets the first bite, as tradition demands. He chews thoughtfully, perhaps for the first time in his life, and murmurs, "Oh." Then he just nods, slowly, like a bishop confirming a miracle. Next, the blacksmith. He bites, he swears, then apologizes to the sisters, then swears again because he can't help it. Marjorie tries both loaves, Convent and Martin's, and declares with a grin, "This one makes my molars write poetry." No one asks her what that means, but it sounds convincing. The abbess frowns. Then she steps forward. She slices off a piece of Martin's loaf, sniffs it, and takes a bite. There is silence. The kind of silence that usually comes before thunder, or judgment, or ecclesiastical smiting. She chews, swallows, and says, in a voice like the tolling of an uncertain bell, "Acceptable." The crowd gasps. This is the closest thing to praise the abbess has given a mortal man since 1322. Martin nods, just once. Then, and this is the moment that no one forgets, Sister Beata steps forward. She holds one of her own loaves. She holds Martin's, and she switches sides. "I prefer his," she says, voice trembling but clear. Sister Wulfhild looks horrified. Sister Cuthberga mutters something about spiritual disobedience, but the damage is done, because if the convent's own trainee can't lie about the loaves, the illusion breaks. Villagers begin queuing at Martin's stall. The sisters pack up early, citing contemplation. Even the vicar sidles over and whispers, "Can I get one without raisins?" And Martin, for the first time in weeks, sells out before the hour of tears. But the victory isn't just in the coin. It's in the fact that the abbess never requests another training session, that the convent oven mysteriously requires repairs for the next 3 months, that Sister Cuthberga is reassigned to preserves and pickling, a fate worse than crust in her world. And Martin? He bakes, quietly, consistently, with a little more swagger in his sourdough and a faint smile every time a customer sniffs and says, "This smells better than grace." He still wakes before dawn, still fights the flour barrel every Wednesday, still curses when the cat knocks over the yeast jar. But now, when he sees the abbess walking past with a basket of apples, he nods politely. And she nods back. Because in the strange little war between one stubborn baker and a convent full of determined novices, something miraculous happened. Martin survived. And the nuns? They finally admitted, sometimes a crust is divine. The third history is what it was like to be a scribe, copying texts for the convent. Imagine spending 10 hours a day bent over a table, copying Latin phrases you barely understand, while your spine slowly turns into the shape of a question mark. Welcome to the noble life of a medieval scribe, the monkish middle manager of parchment and back pain. He wakes to bells, not charming ones, not, ooh, how peaceful cathedral chimes. No, these are the get-up-or-else bells, rung by Brother Ethelric, who was definitely a rooster in a past life and never quite got over it. It's just past prime, the early morning prayer, and already the air inside the convent is cold enough to chew. You shuffle toward the scriptorium, the sacred room where books are born very, very slowly. Imagine a library married a torture chamber, then decided to raise introverts. That's the vibe. Cold stone walls. One window. No fire. Because obviously, a fire might warm your fingers, and we can't have productivity. Also, the monks worry it could singe a priceless manuscript. Or worse, warm someone into drowsiness. And speaking of manuscripts, let's talk parchment. Not paper. Parchment. As in, congratulations, you're writing on the stretched, scraped, and dried skin of a sheep. If the scribe is lucky, it's a clean piece. If not, it still smells faintly of barn and existential despair. Each page is worth more than a month's food, which explains why you don't get a second chance if you misspell episcopus. Ink blots. Heresy. Now take a seat, though seat is generous. It's a wooden plank, angled like it's judging you. Your knees jam under a slanted writing table. Your tools, one quill, one knife, for scraping off errors, a pot of ink made from oak galls, and a burning desire to not sneeze on your work. Today's assignment? A theological treatise so dense it could double as masonry. Something by Isidore of Seville, or maybe Augustine. Honestly, it's hard to care when every sentence starts with, "Verily, the nature of the soul." Your job is not to question, embellish, or, heaven forbid, summarize. You copy. Every line, every abbreviation, every mysterious marginal doodle left by the last bored scribe. That's not whimsy. That's tradition. Historical curiosity pill. Some scribes added tiny notes in the margins when no one was looking. Things like, "This parchment is awful," or "The ink is frozen again." Scholars now call these colophons. They're the medieval equivalent of passive-aggressive post-its. Now, of course, there's silence. Not the peaceful kind. The tense, Brother Oswin will shush you with his mind kind. If someone coughs, 6 heads turn. If someone sighs too loud, you get assigned to clean the goose pens. And don't even dream of chatting. The last scribe who muttered Amen a little too conversationally was sent to the herb garden for 6 months. The real villain in the room? Time. Hours pass without movement. The candle flickers. Your hands cramp. You've written the word salvation 37 times, and you no longer know if it's spelled right or if your brain is leaking. The ink has dried up again. Time to get more from the cellar, where it's stored next to the dried fish and old regrets. You scrape a mistake off the parchment with the knife, careful not to dig too deep. One wrong stroke, and you're suddenly illuminating goats on a new piece of vellum. And no one wants that, especially not the goat. Lunch is bread, cheese, and regret. You sit in the refectory under the stern eye of a mural of St. Jerome, who famously translated the Bible into Latin and probably never got ink under his fingernails like this. You consider asking the abbot for warmer gloves, but last time someone did that, he was given a lecture on the fiery trials of scribes in purgatory. Back to work. The light is worse now. The one tiny window casts a mean little sunbeam that somehow misses your desk entirely. You try to keep your lines straight using a lead stylus, but one parchment sheet has a weird wrinkle. It buckles your Latin like a drunk goat. No matter. You press on. Evening bells signal the end. Sort of. You don't get to go home. This is home. You shuffle back to your chamber, which is one small cot and a view of the wall. But you bring your ink-stained hands with you, and the faint ache in your shoulders that whispers, "Tomorrow, we copy again." And still, somehow, there's a strange pride in it. Because that page, that one you copied today, might outlive you by 800 years. Long after the walls crumble and the names are forgotten, someone might run a finger across that parchment and read your careful lettering. Still dark, still neat. They'll never know your name, but your work, it'll speak. But tomorrow, of course, it might also scream. It begins with a nosebleed, a slow, quiet drip right onto the bottom margin of Psalm 119, which, ironically, is all about divine order and not staining Scripture with your bodily fluids. He tilts his head back, dabs with the sleeve of his robe, which now doubles as both tissue and personal shame record, and prays no one saw. Blood on the text means starting over. Starting over means confession. Confession means explaining to the abbot why your nasal passage decided to rebel against the Word of God. So the day begins, red-tinted and uphill. The scriptorium is colder than usual. One of those damp, chill mornings that makes your bones creak like wooden floorboards. The walls drip faintly, not with water, but with the collective despair of a dozen brothers desperately pretending they enjoy their sacred calling. No one speaks, not because they're serene, because it takes too much energy to unfreeze their jaws. Now, settle in. Quill in hand, ink refreshed. Today's task, an illuminated initial. That's right, decoration. The big fancy letters at the start of a section. This one's a massive blue Q, curling like a smug snail across 2 full lines. Inside it, a delicate scene of Saint Benedict banishing Satan with a cross, and what suspiciously looks like a judgmental side eye. You do not feel up to the challenge. Yesterday, you drew a vine that looked like a worm with anxiety. Today, you're expected to produce something worthy of God and gold leaf. So naturally, you begin by chewing the end of your quill and staring at the ceiling for 40 minutes. Historical curiosity pill. Gold leaf was applied by hand with a squirrel hair brush, and enough nervous sweat to fill a baptismal font. And yes, some scribes would breathe on the page to make it tacky before laying the gold. Congratulations! That shimmering halo you admired in a museum was possibly activated by halitosis. Brother Alfric, the convent's best illuminator, works 2 desks down. He hasn't spoken since Michaelmas, and smells faintly of garlic and judgment. His latest capital B has a dragon eating a knight's legs. You assume it's a metaphor, or revenge. Your own letter is fine. You sketch Benedict's beard 3 times before deciding he looks too young, too old, then too French. You settle for vaguely pious with a strong jaw and hope for divine forgiveness. But the ink is freezing again. That means a trip to the calefactory, the one semi-warm room in the convent, where ink and candles are stored like precious artifacts. You pass Brother Edwin on the way, who mutters that the devil lives in his ink pot and won't let him finish Leviticus. You don't argue. You suspect the devil has leased several units in this building. On the walk back, you spot a novice crying near the cloister. His quill snapped mid-sentence, and he thinks it's a sign God hates his handwriting. You tell him no, it's the geese. Geese hate all of us. You hand him your spare quill, which is slightly chewed and mostly bent, but he looks at it like you just passed him the Holy Grail. He might still quit by Lent, but for now he returns to his desk. Lunch is thin stew and thicker silence. Brother Wolfwine tells a thrilling story about a prior who spilled ink on the Gospel of John and tried to blame a mouse. He was caught, naturally, because the paw prints were suspiciously human-sized. No one laughs. It's hard to laugh when your own manuscript has a visible smudge you've been denying for 3 days. You spend the afternoon on rubrication. That's the red ink for headings, names, and sacred phrases. It's made from powdered cinnabar or red lead, both delightfully toxic. But no one talks about that, probably because anyone who did died from breathing too deeply. The red ink flows well today, which is suspicious. Nothing ever goes well in the scriptorium unless it's preparing for something to go terribly. You glance out the tiny window. Rain. Figures. Evening arrives, and the bell for Vespers rings with all the cheer of a tax audit. You stretch your fingers, which no longer obey commands without protest. A half-finished folio lies before you. One clean page, one ink-dappled sleeve, and one saint who still looks vaguely like your cousin Richard. You consider adding a tiny doodle in the margin, something harmless. A bird wearing a hat, maybe a cat chasing a demon. But you remember what happened to Brother Ethelstan, who drew a smiley face in the corner of an Easter homily and was reassigned to laundry for a month. You settle for a small flourish at the bottom of the page, a perfectly innocent swirl that definitely doesn't resemble an irritated snail. It's barely rebellion, but in a world of lines and rules, it feels like graffiti. As night falls, you kneel in your cell, say the last prayer of the day, and blow out the candle. Your fingers still twitch from hours of writing. Your back whispers terrible threats about tomorrow. And yet, somehow, there's peace. Because today, you finished a page. One whole page. Beautiful, clean, possibly legible. And tomorrow you'll start another. You're not just copying scripture. You're anchoring words to the world. Ink on skin. Thought into permanence. It's dull. It's painful. And it might be the most meaningful thing you'll ever do. Assuming, of course, you don't sneeze on it first. It's just after Matins. The night prayer. Yes, night. That delightful moment when most sane humans are asleep. And you, a deeply fortunate servant of the Lord, are gently yanked from your slumber by bells that sound like a remorseful cow falling down a staircase. Your feet hit the stone floor, cold, always. The kind of cold that feels personal. You dress in darkness because candle rations are being conserved, which is medieval code for good luck seeing anything until sunrise. And why are you awake exactly? Because God likes you? No, because the abbot received a very special manuscript request from a neighboring abbey, a copy of Gregory's Pastoral Care in elegant hand with full rubrication and, cue the groans, gold illumination. And since your Latin is technically less disastrous than that of Brother Osric, who once spelled sacrament with 3 M's, the burden falls to you. So today's shift starts early, and it starts with Latin so dense it could sink a fishing boat. Gregory, in all his wisdom, apparently felt that true spiritual guidance must be phrased like a riddle, wrapped in a sermon stuffed into a legal contract. By the time the sun rises, you've completed exactly 1 paragraph. Your hand aches. Your knees ache. Your soul aches. But congratulations. The margin is straight, the ink lines are neat, and no vermin have gnawed the corner. A medieval win. But then comes the real test: illumination. Specifically, the gold leaf border for the prologue, a radiant sunburst meant to symbolize divine wisdom. You, a man who once failed to draw a recognizable fish, are now expected to produce an image of radiant enlightenment, using a squirrel brush and flakes of metal that float away if you so much as exhale. You begin with the gum base, a sticky mixture of honey, egg white, and quiet panic. Then comes the gold, paper thin and wildly uncooperative. You place it with the delicacy of a surgeon and the expression of someone about to drop a priceless heirloom. And you do. Not the whole sheet, mercifully. Just a fragment. It sticks to your sleeve, then to your hand, then to your nose. You try to brush it off, but congratulations. Now you're anointed. Possibly a bishop. Possibly a fool. Historical curiosity pill. Gold leaf in manuscripts wasn't just decorative. It reflected candlelight. So at night, the words of God literally shimmered. Nothing says divine presence like a page that glows softly while you squint through prayers in the cold. Once the gold is down and your dignity marginally recovered, you move on to the flourishes. Tiny vines, birds, saints, a winged cow, possibly symbolic, possibly the result of sleep deprivation. You add a tiny monk with a halo who looks suspiciously like Brother Alfric. Artistic vengeance is subtle but satisfying. Then the abbot enters. Now, there are two kinds of footsteps in a monastery. Casual shuffle, probably Brother Dunstan looking for extra bread, and, uh-oh, that's authority. This is the latter. The abbot inspects your work, says nothing, frowns slightly. You stop breathing. Then, at last, he says, acceptable, which, from him, is practically a love letter. He leaves. You exhale. Brother Osric claps softly, earning himself a shush from someone behind a stack of glosses. It's time for the midday meal, which today features a rare delight: beans. Possibly overcooked, definitely oversalted, but they're not turnips, so spirits rise accordingly. You share a bench with Brother Edric, who tells you that the prior once fell asleep while copying the Rule of St. Benedict and woke up having drawn a mustache on the Virgin Mary. The entire convent had to fast for 3 days just to make up for it. You resolve, silently, never to blink too long while drawing sacred faces. The afternoon passes in a kind of trance. You copy letters that start to blur. You forget how predicatio is spelled. You remember halfway through a paragraph that you're copying the wrong chapter. You scrape it off. You recopy. You try not to cry. And then the ink runs dry again. So it's back to the calefactory, where Brother Leofric is testing a new batch made with extra soot. It looks like tar, smells like vinegar, and stains your fingers so deeply that by Vespers it appears you've murdered a squid. You return to your folio. The page curls slightly. The gold still shines. The text flows neatly again. For now, you've written half of Gregory's first chapter. Only 7 more to go. But no mistakes. Not today. Before Compline, you tidy your desk. You clean the quill, cap the ink, carefully roll the finished sheet into its wooden tube. The novice you helped yesterday is watching. You show him how to line up the margin pins, how to smooth the parchment with chalk, how to whisper threats to the ink so it behaves. He nods like he's learning secrets. You almost feel important. Like maybe, in a world where few know your name and fewer care what you do, this matters. And it does. Because when the wind howls across the moor and winter chews at the edges of your cell, There's a strange comfort in knowing that a century from now, someone might crack open this book, your book, and see your careful hand. They won't know you, but they'll see your light, pressed into gold and ink. They'll hear your silence, loud as any sermon. And maybe, just maybe, they'll know you were here, quiet, tired, but faithful. The candle flickers. So does your sanity. It's just past lauds, morning prayer, and you've already made your first mistake. You wrote predicatur where you should have written predicator. One tiny O-T-U-O, an entire afternoon lost. Not because you'll be punished, but because you'll have to scrape it off with the knife, re-prepare the surface, and hope the parchment hasn't absorbed the ink like a smug sponge. That's right, the page is smug. You begin assigning emotional traits to inanimate objects sometime around day 70 of transcribing theological commentary. But no time to dwell. Today, the abbot wants you to complete the margins on folio 26 a dense homily on humility that's 90% quotation and 10% passive-aggressive jabs at the Cistercians. And yes, the gold leaf border must include birds. Not doves or angels, mind you. Peacocks. Symbol of eternal life. Symbol of neck pain. You pull out your brushes, most of which have the sad, frayed quality of a monk who's just found out the wine ration has been reduced again. You dip carefully into the pigment. Ground azurite, bright as heaven, and twice as expensive. And then it happens. A sneeze. Historical curiosity pill. Medieval scribes sometimes worked wearing cloths over their mouths to prevent breath, spit, or, heaven help us, sneezes from damaging manuscripts. One rogue sneeze could ruin a week's work, or start a fire, or both. This one doesn't ruin the page, but it does scatter a jar of soot-based ink across your sleeve, your desk, and a good quarter of the floor. Brother Osric lets out a scandalized gasp from 2 desks over, as though he's just witnessed an exorcism done improperly. You spend the next hour cleaning, with rags, with vinegar, with your own increasingly resentful sleeve. The parchment is saved, but your robe now looks like it was used to beat out a chimney. Lunch is late, and eaten with one ink-stained hand, since the other is still trembling slightly from the adrenaline of near catastrophe. The beans are undercooked today. Someone jokes that it's a fast by divine accident. No one laughs. The cook is sitting 2 benches away, clutching a ladle like it owes him money. Back in the scriptorium, disaster strikes again. But not your desk this time. Brother Cuthbert, tasked with copying a Latin commentary on the Psalms, has just discovered that he's skipped an entire folio. 4 columns of text. Gone. Somehow, his numbering went from Ixixefenivine to 99.9, and the abbot will notice. He always notices. There is no solution. There is only panic. The room collectively holds its breath as Cuthbert walks out in silence, carrying the mistake with the kind of dignity usually reserved for carrying the relics of a saint. He is not seen again for 2 days. When he returns, he's been reassigned to copying the Daily Saints calendar. Less Latin, more dates. No gold. A demotion dressed as a kindness. You return to your own task with renewed caution, double-checking each folio number and muttering, "Please be right," under your breath, like a monkish mantra. You realize you've said it propter hoc at least 70 times today. You no longer know what it means. You're not even sure it's Latin anymore. The sun fades, the candle dims, your ink thickens from the chill. You stir it with the back of the knife. Very carefully. Last week, someone stirred too hard, and the ink pot flipped. They're now tending sheep. Indoors, as punishment. Brother Alfric sneaks you a walnut. No one knows where he gets them. Possibly a stash. Possibly a squirrel conspiracy. You nod in thanks and nibble slowly, savoring the fleeting taste of something that didn't come out of a vat or involve turnips. Evening falls. You finish the last peacock. It's cross-eyed, slightly aggressive-looking, and has the faint air of a bird that's about to sue someone. You decide it gives the margin character. After all, eternity should have some personality. Before Compline, the abbot walks through. He says nothing, but places a new roll of parchment on your desk. Fresh, unmarked, glistening faintly with that eerie smoothness only freshly scraped sheep can offer. You stare at it with a mix of dread and awe. It's beautiful. It's pure. It's a threat. You've just finished one folio, and now the next awaits. Back in your cell, you wash your hands in cold water and rub a little lard into your joints. An old trick learned from Brother Leofric, who insists it's what St. Jerome would have done. You highly doubt Jerome ever rubbed pig fat into his knuckles after a long day of penmanship, but you're in no mood to challenge the claim. As you lie on your straw mat, you stare at the ceiling and consider something strange. You're exhausted. Your eyes burn. Your thumb is blistered. But somewhere deep inside, you're also proud. One more page done, one more sacred whisper preserved in ink. And while no one outside these walls will ever know the long hours, the aching spine, or the sheer rage of trying to draw a symmetrical vine with a brush made from animal hair, the work will survive. Centuries from now, someone might open this volume and gasp. Not at your name, they won't know it, but at the gold. The careful lines, the solemn, aching beauty of it all. They'll think, how devoted he must have been. You snort softly into your blanket. Devoted? Yes, and mildly deranged. The day begins not with a bell, but with a raven. It lands on the sill just as dawn breaks, stares directly into your soul, and lets out a call that sounds like someone stepped on the word despair. You take it as a good omen, mostly because, at this point, you've run out of bad ones. This is it, your final page. Well, not the final page. The book has many. But this one is yours, the last assigned to your hand, your quill, your poor spine that now bends like the arch of an apologetic cat. After this, you are to return to more practical duties, assisting in the herb garden and helping Brother Elgar sort the medicinal leeches. A fitting retirement. The scriptorium is silent, save for the scratching of quills and the occasional throat clearing that sounds suspiciously like judgment. You light your candle, dip your quill, and begin. In principio erat verbum. In the beginning was the word. A fitting passage to end on, not just spiritually, but poetically, though there's very little poetry to the ache in your thumb or the way your eyes blur if you blink too slowly. Still, you copy it with reverence, one letter at a time, each carefully shaped like it matters, because it does. Because this tedious, meticulous act of transcription is the Word made flesh. Well, parchment. Halfway down the page, Brother Osric drops his knife. It clatters across the floor like divine punishment. You all flinch. Brother Alfric sighs. Somewhere in the corner, a novice quietly begins praying for mercy or invisibility. Probably both. And then, like any act of devotion, the work continues. By midday, you've reached the final passage. One line left. You breathe carefully. Don't smudge. Don't flinch. Don't sneeze. And then you do something rare. You add a colophon. Historical curiosity pill. Colophons were little notes scribes left at the end of a manuscript, a kind of medieval postscript. They ranged from blessings to complaints like, "Thank God this book is finished," or "Writing is excessive drudgery." Some even left their names, though this was frowned upon in stricter monasteries. Humility, after all, doesn't sign its work. Yours reads, "Qui legit, oret pro scriptore. Manus laboravit, sed mens oravit." He who reads, pray for the scribe. The hand labored, but the mind prayed. You sign it with 3 small dots, your mark, meaningless to most, but known to a few. A quiet rebellion, a soft whisper across time. When you hand in the finished folio, the abbot simply nods, which, in monastic terms, is the emotional equivalent of being hugged, knighted, and handed a bowl of fresh cherries. He tells you the next scribe will begin their section tomorrow. You've done well. No procession, no feast, just release. You pack up your desk, your knife, your worn brushes, your little stone that kept the parchment flat. You slip your last quill into your sleeve, not out of sentiment, but because it's still sharp, and ink is expensive. Brotherly Offric claps you on the back. "You survived," he says. "Barely." That night, as the bell rings for Compline, you don't walk to the chapel. You limp. Your legs are stiff. Your fingers feel like someone rolled them through a tight scroll, and then set fire to it. You sit in the back pew and stare at the candlelight flickering against the stone. The same flicker your gold leaf was meant to catch. The same light that dances over pages you've written, that will one day shine over those pages on distant altars, in dusty libraries, beneath glass cases and awed eyes. You think of the others, the scribes long dead, their ink faded, but their voices still intact. You've been one of them for a moment. A vessel, a copyist, a quiet link in an unbroken chain of silent, ink-stained hands. Outside, the wind howls. Winter is coming early this year. You can already feel it in the walls. But this time, you won't face it hunched over parchment. This time, it will find you in the garden, under a gray hood, squinting at thyme leaves and muttering about saints who never had to copy commentary on the Psalms. As you lie in bed that night, on straw that pokes and shifts with every breath, you realize something oddly comforting. Your hands may finally heal. But your mind? That's changed forever. Because once you've written the word, once you've sat that long in silence with the saints, the scholars, and the God who may or may not be watching through a cracked window pane, you never quite leave the page. You carry it, like a prayer, like a scar, like a line of ink stretching across centuries, patiently waiting to be read again.